The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. A's Baseball, past, present, and future. I am Ralph Tyko of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. One of the hosts, Jerry Feidelberg, is out cruising the world on a lifetime experience. He's got 6 weeks out in Madagascar and from here to be gone. And we miss him. Nancy Finley, his co-hostess, is here. I'm here, and we have a terrific guest. First of all, hello, Nancy. How are you?
Hello.
Good to talk to you, as usual.
Thank you.
Yeah, our guest is a return.
I'm excited about our guest. I'm very excited.
Oh, I am. As I told Nancy, he's the most down-to-earth person I've ever talked to in baseball. We knew each other 35 years ago, very briefly, and he was so nice then, and he hasn't changed in all those years. Ken Korach, the announcer of your Oakland A's.
I have heard nothing but good things about Ken.
Kenny, welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks. It's great to be with you guys, and I appreciate the introduction there, Ralph. And good to be with you, Nancy.
Thank you. Same here. I think, now, Ralph, you said Ken was down to earth when you met him and still is. Where did you meet?
Well, I was the Topps representative on the West Coast, covering the California League and the Northwest League back in the early 80s, and I guess it was 1984 when we met, and it was up in Rohnert Park. And I remember it because Kenny was nice enough to give me directions to get to my next destination. It might have been 83, but
it was 84, I think, Ralph. Yeah.
Okay, but
the other thing that was, the thing about that was that because the team was in Rohnert Park, but they were called the Redwood Pioneers, scouts, this would happen. It wasn't unusual to have a scout say, I went down to Redwood City, thinking the team was playing in Redwood City because they were the Redwood Pioneers. Now, they were in the Redwood Empire, but they called Rohnert Park home.
Oh, okay.
Right, and it was a nice little park across the freeway from where it should have been, I thought, to attract more kids. But they were some great days, and you were basically was that your first gig in broadcasting?
It was kind of an extension of my first gig. My first radio job came in Petaluma in the fall of 1980, so I was still in Sonoma County when I was doing the Redwood Pioneers. We were on a different station back then, and I was working for the team. But that was my first full-time job broadcasting professional baseball. 1984, we had a tremendous team, by the way, Ralph. If you might recall, I think they were literally 53-17 in the second half that year in the California League. And the ballpark was a cool little, charming little park, but you're right about where it was built. It was like a little miniature candlestick because the wind and the fog would roll in the afternoon and the evening. It could get pretty chilly over there.
I can imagine.
Right. And, pardon me, Nancy, I'm sorry.
I imagine that. Yes, cold. That was something to get used to out here from Kansas City.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
Who are some of the people that you met that you stay in touch with today?
Well, that club actually, they bucked the odds in terms of the number of players who would go on to play in the big leagues. They said that, and back then they said that if 4% or 4 or 5% of the players who played in single A ball got to the big leagues, that was almost better than average. And yet there were several guys off that club that eventually got to the major leagues. Mark McLemore is a guy that I still see quite a bit. Mark, of course, a great middle infielder for many clubs in the big leagues, including some time with the A's, and still works on the telecast for the Rangers doing pregame and postgame stuff. And we were close back then, and we've remained pretty close over the years. And there are a lot of, the most exciting player off that club was Devon White, who I'm sure you guys remember as one of the great center fielders during his time in the big leagues, especially when he played on some phenomenal teams with the Blue Jays. And he literally, and I was still kind of starting out in my career, but he changed the way that I called the game, because when a ball would be hit to center field or left center or right center, when you'd instinctively say, well, that's going to fall in for a base hit. He was so great. He got such incredible jumps on the ball and then could make these diving and leaping catches. I had to wait to make sure that he didn't catch the ball before I said that the ball had dropped in. He was that good playing in center field.
Wow. You just brought up a question that I've been meaning to ask you. How does the newfangled shifting affect your broadcasting?
It is an excellent question, and it creates a little bit of a quandary for me, because I think as any play-by-play person, especially on the radio, you want to set the table for that at bat, and even for each pitch. One of the things I've talked to young broadcasters about would be to tell me where the infielders are playing. Is a third baseman in on the grass? Is a center fielder shaded toward right center? And now all of a sudden you have this shifting, and even with certain clubs, like the Astros, for instance, they started doing this 2 or 3 years ago, where they would shift infielders during an at-bat, depending on the count. And I'm thinking, well, should I mention this before every pitch? 3 infielders on the right side. Now the shortstop moves the other side a second. Second baseman is now playing where the third baseman plays, and the third baseman's playing in short right field. So
you have something recorded that says that really fast.
I know, because it has. There's no doubt that all the shifting has really complicated my life.
Oh, yes.
Not only
and
your
then,
life,
there's,
I think
the other thing is, one of the most basic things about the game and watching the game as a fan or as a broadcaster is keeping score. And it used to be you could go back through your scorebook and really recreate a game and get a great feel for it, where certain balls are hit. But if the third baseman is playing in short right field because he exchanges positions with the second baseman, on a ground ball in his short right that's played by the third baseman, that's still a 5-3. So if you looked at your scorebook and didn't, or at somebody else's scorebook and didn't know what happened in the game, you would think, well, that was a ground ball to third, but it's not, because of the shifting. So that's another aspect of it that has made things a little more complicated.
Okay.
Oh.
There used to be an expression, a keystone combo. You don't hear that much very often, but I thought the poster boy for that was Nellie Fox and Louis Aparicio. What that entailed were 2 guys playing on the same team for more than just a year or 2, for a long time, and they developed a sense of where they were going to be, how they liked to throw, this, that, and the other thing. With all the shifting, there's none of that teamwork that you can develop. Because how do you develop teamwork when, as you say, the third baseman is playing right field? And I think it takes away from the game. It takes away from the efficiency of an infield, even though you may be a little bit more apt to be in the right position. What you do with the ball when you get it when you're in the right position is how do you know? How do you prepare for that as a player? You're a third baseman playing short right field. Well, what do I do if the ball is hit to me? That's going through your mind. Does that make any sense, Ken?
Well, yeah, and it creates odd angles for players defensively. And we've talked about that a lot on our broadcast, where if 3 infielders are on the right side, but the third baseman is playing close to the line over third, now there's a double play ball. Oftentimes the shortstop will have to backtrack to get back to second base to try to turn a double play by moving to his right, where normally everything he had been taught, and instinctively you're thinking at short, you go to your left to cover second on a double play. So it does create a lot of different angles for infielders, but it's also the job of the offense, of the hitters, to try to exploit that. And I think the only way that you might see a reduction in the shifting would be if the hitters become more adept at combating the shifts. The other thing that's happened is that there are hitters who've really gotten frustrated by it. Because how many times, from the time we were kids, we were taught, hit the ball up the middle, right? If the ball is outside, hit a ground ball up the middle, that's going to be a base hit. Mm-hmm. Now, how many times does that ball get caught and turns into a routine out, or line drives in a short right field that might be caught by the second baseman? So it can get into the head of certain players, especially offensive players.
Why was this change made to make baseball more exciting? It was
made because the part of it was the evolution of sabermetrics. Mm-hmm. And the thinking that based on numbers you could quantify and determine the likelihood of where certain balls were going to be hit, especially on the infield, and that it would improve your defense and improve your chances of reducing the number of runs that are scored, to put fielders in positions that they hadn't played in the past. So it's all about run prevention.
I thought that
based on scouting reports and numbers that go into computers, and it's proliferated across the game.
That was the reason? So
absolutely, sure.
Okay.
Now, they're not shifted on every play, Nancy. It's just from situation to situation.
Okay.
Could it cause more injuries than it's worth, given the odd angles that players are catching and throwing the ball at?
I haven't noticed that, but let's look back. I mean, 60 years ago they shifted on Ted Williams, so it's not like this is revolutionary. Okay. It's just that you see it happening a lot more often now.
Okay, so it has been done.
I mean, if you think the odds are great that a hitter is going to hit the ball to the right side of the infield, the thinking is, well, we'll put three infielders over there, and we'll have a better chance of defending that player. Mm-hmm. So that really gets to the root of why you see a lot of the shifting now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Who did you grow up rooting for, Ken, when you were a kid? Was it the Angels?
I did grow up rooting for the Angels, although growing up in Southern California, Ralph and Nancy, I was a lot closer to Dodger Stadium, and we went to far more Dodger games than Angel games. But for whatever reason, my dad and I became fans of the American League. And especially when the Angels were born back in the 60s, I became a really big Angel fan. And that's where, when you develop those emotional ties to a ball club, my ties were to the Angels back then.
With Bill Rigney managing, and ironically, Bill Rigney was an executive, let's put it that way. I don't think he ever had a title up here when he came back. Mm-hmm. But he was an executive with the A's who meant an awful lot to that organization.
And
that was one of the greatest. Go ahead, Nancy. I'm sorry.
Gene Autry was the owner, because I remember he was one of Dad's favorites to sit with at the owner meetings.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Bill Rigney, this is one of the great thrills of my career, was growing up as an Angel fan. And like, I do the Bob Melvin show every day now. I do the manager show, and Bill Rigney would do the manager show for the Angels as part of their pregame broadcast on KMPC in Los Angeles. And I thought, he's one of those guys, when you heard him talk, that he just sounded like baseball, and the love of the game came through. And I was enthralled just listening to that 5-minute show every day. And then, of course, became a big fan of the team. And Fred Haney was the general manager. But then, like you said, Ralph,
Dick Enberg, the late Dick Enberg, just passed away.
Later became the voice of the Angels on radio.
Right.
But when Rigney was still working for the A's, and he would drop by the booth when I was working with Bill, and I would chat with Rig, and this went on almost until right before he passed away, and we lost him. And he would say that he listened to all the games and he enjoyed the broadcast. To think of a life and how sometimes things get all knitted together in baseball, and things come full circle. And to think, here I was as a kid idolizing Rigney, and now he was listening to our games.
Oh.
That was just such a special thing for me.
Oh,
Ken, he was the utility infielder on my New York Giants. And
sure, yeah.
In 1951, when I went to my first game, and in 54, or after Leo got got fired, he took over as the manager in New York, and the first manager in San Francisco. So he had an incredible career.
When did they hit San Francisco from New York?
Yes, he was the first manager. He came out with the original 1958 Giants, who was, that changed baseball forever. Expansion to the West Coast.
New York.
It wasn't yet expansion, but it sure changed the face of the baseball map.
Because it's not hot in New York during the summer, right? At night games.
Oh well. Yeah.
It's not cold like we get here at we had here.
No, it isn't. But AT&T is warmer than Candlestick. It's not
much better.
Frightening warm. We got to talk about a stadium for Oakland. Ken, is there anything in the wake of what I consider to be a major setback in terms of planning, of hopes, with the stadium thing falling through? Can the A's recover?
Well, I don't think there's any question they can recover, Ralph. I don't have anything to add at this point beyond the statement the A's put out after the news came down that the talks had been broken off regarding the A's and the possibility of building at the Peralta site. Now, I would hope, and I'm sure there'll be clarity moving forward. I don't think anything, although there's the likelihood that things will be happening or have happened in the last several weeks behind the scenes, but I'm really not privy to what may or may not be going on, Ralph. But I think there will be some clarity regarding the stadium situation upcoming, especially because the A's have Fan Fest coming up at the end of January, on January 27th in Oakland. But at this point, there's really nothing that I can add beyond the statement the A's put out. At that point, the news came down regarding what was happening with the Peralta site.
Yeah, couldn't right.
How would you like to see it? Yep. Would you like to see a waterfront stadium, or would you like to see it in the Coliseum area where it is now?
Well, without really going overboard to dance around your question, the most important thing to me, as far as the A's are concerned, would be that the A's stay in Oakland. It's less important to me now. I don't sign the check. So I would like to see the club, and I think and I've always said this, and Nancy, of course, goes way back to when the A's came out to Oakland in 1968. I really feel that the Bay Area is a two-team market, and I think that's been proven over the years. If you go back to the basically 30 years that the Giants were playing at Candlestick and the A's were playing at the Coliseum, the attendance really was split right down the middle. I'm not sure exactly the figures, but it was around 15 years where the Giants had the best attendance. About 15 years, the A's had the better attendance. And the only reason things got skewed was because the Giants got their ballpark. They got AT&T Park. So it's always been very clear to me, and this is why the Peralta site had been favored by the A's, that their vision was for an urban park. And in talking with Dave Cavell and the other members of the A's front office, the vision and the hope they had was to build something similar or along the lines to a Fenway Park or Wrigley Field, to have that kind of urban experience. And I think in a perfect world, that would still be my first choice. I love the site. We'll just have to wait and see how things evolve and whether other sites come into the picture or whether they might be able to go back to that site. But I'm really not privy to what has been going on at this point, Ralph. And like I said, hopefully we will gain some clarity in the not-too-distant future.
You know, it's interesting. Dad taught at Laney business law during the off season, but I thought that
right at that site, absolutely.
Right at that site. But I agree. I agree with Ken. I know when we moved here, I remember hearing Dad and Uncle Charlie say that they thought the area was still going through growing pains, having two teams two teams with us as the addition. So
well, in 1989, each team drew about 2.5 million, if I'm not mistaken. So
there was one year the A's drew 2.9. I don't remember if it was 89 or 90. It might have been 90 when the A's drew 2.9 million. Came really close to drawing 3 million at a point when nobody was drawing 3 million fans to through the turnstiles.
And then we were
Right.
we were winning World Series when no one was, but then we weren't really drawing. We weren't filling up the Coliseum the way we thought, it should fill out.
I think when both teams are doing well, it's good for both teams.
Yes. Well, the Raiders did well. I mean, the Raiders and Warriors were doing well when we did in the 70s.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Ralph, because I've always thought that way, that the more buzz there is surrounding the game, that's best for both teams.
Yeah,
and when the A's and the Giants are good.
With interleague play being such a force, I've never understood why this market doesn't have that same flavor for the Subway Series in New York, as an example. They could really play it up and not tear each other down. And
I don't know. I mean, the crowds are really good when the Giants come to the Coliseum, and they're really good when the A's go across there. And there's a lot of energy in the ballpark. So I wouldn't say that it hasn't been played up. Maybe it's not as fiery as it is in New York, but I think if you talk to A's fans and maybe even some Giants fans as well, it's still a pretty big deal when the teams play.
Okay.
I hope so. Yes. Because that always excited me. I like to see that whenever it happens.
We got to end on a somber note. Rob, I want to pronounce it right, Rob Picciolo, who was a shortstop with the A's and minor league coach for a long time, big league coach for a long time, passed away at a much too young age of 64, had a fatal heart attack and died within the last day or so. And I am saddened. It's a loss of family for the A's, and I'm becoming part of that through this show. And
yes, you are.
Yeah, it is sad for me, and I wanted to extend our condolences to his family and friends. And hate to end on a somber note, but that's part of it. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate you being here. I wish you continued success. I don't even have to ask, your knee is totally rehabbed. Are you playing golf again?
Yeah, I've been playing quite a bit. I can't say that I've been playing effectively, but I have been playing, and I love to play, and I feel great, Ralph, so thanks for asking.
Oh, that's terrific, because for a while...
thanks for mentioning Picciolo. I think that you're... Sorry for interrupting, but I think it was great that you mentioned Rob Picciolo, because everybody who came in contact with him will tell you that he was one of the finest people they had ever met, and never had an unkind word to say. Was drafted number 1 by the A's in the secondary phase, and played several years in the big leagues, including time with the A's. And like you said, he became the bench coach for the Angels. That was not even that long ago. So we really are going to miss him, and really one of the finer people who's ever played and worked in the game.
Very well said. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Nancy. As usual, you're charming, and we will be back next week. And I want to ask everybody out there, if you enjoy any of our offerings, to please box up some lightly used children's books and take them to the Head Start program in the community, state, city, county where you live. There's always a Head Start program, and you got to get kids reading. You got to get them interested in stuff, school ready, off the streets, out of video games, whatever it is. The more books, the better. Get them to your Head Start program, and that'd be great. Happy New Year, everybody. It's our first show of the new year, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you each week.
And go A's.
Be well. Thank you again, Ken.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Nancy. Great being with you. Happy New Year.
All right.
Happy
Be
New Year.
well.